A lot of designers come out of school and try to find their footing. Others throw themselves into projects like there's no tomorrow. This week, join me, Zach Walsh, as I talk with Ethan H Reynolds about their game, Neon Knights. This cyberpunk game comes as a neatly wrapped gift that is sure to scratch your sci-fi needs. We talk themes of cyberpunk, coming out of school, and surprise success. Welcome to Schedule for Launch, a podcast to discover projects that you may have missed. This week, I am here with Ethan. And Ethan, thank you so much for coming onto the show this week.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure.
And we're going to be talking a little bit about Neon Knights tonight, which it's, for me, when I saw this, it was shortly after my disappointment for Cyberpunk 2077 happened. So this is scratching an itch that I think a lot of people who picked up that game will enjoy.
Oh yeah,
it definitely is the better of the two games.
Hey, I'll take that as a compliment any day. That'd be sick.
But Ethan, before we get too much into Neon Knights, can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely, yeah. So my name's Ethan H Reynolds. That's like my, I guess in quotations, like author name, my pen name. But that's my real name. But yeah, Ethan H Reynolds. Born and raised in good old Virginia, IA on the East Coast. Wonderful place. Grew up having a love for all things nerdy, video games, books, things of that nature. Grew up, after some time realized that, I could go a lot of avenues with my imagination. I could become a writer. I could become an artist. I could become somebody who created games. And throughout the years, I'd always wanted to be that person that created games. So I wanted to become a game designer in the most stereotypical sense. Like, oh, I'm going to code. Oh, I'm going to do all of this 3D animation and stuff like that. I tried and it did not go too well. So I went it's okay. I mean, it's fine, but it gets better. So I started my creative, in quotations, career, I guess. When I was in middle school, I started writing little short stories, and I started creating a universe within these short stories that kind of congealed into this short story collection. And that's really where things like the puzzle pieces really started to come together. After that, I created a big fantasy universe, which I fell in love with for a long time. So then my focus was in literature. But fast forward until probably, basically right when COVID hit, when everybody was stuck in the house, or their houses, I wanted to play a tabletop game because I'd played D&D my freshman year of college before. And I liked it, but it just wasn't my cup of tea per se. Wasn't too enthralled with the complexities of the games, having somebody explain to me how certain level spells work, some of the limitations in 5th edition with certain classes and races and things like that. It didn't really scratch the itch of immersion that say I'm really biased here, but Fallout does, or the Elder Scrolls or something like that, So COVID time hits, I want to make a game. I created a fantasy tabletop role-playing game. My players loved it. Then it went to Cyberpunk, and I created the first draft of Neon Knights. They loved that too, but you're right. Right when Cyberpunk 2077 hit, I was like, man, this game is not being received very well. And I thought, I was like, you know what? I watched, this is a side note, but I watched a video talking about, taking risks, and I wanted to take a risk, and I was like, well, Cyberpunk is kind of the hot thing right now, right? With things I know Dune is nowhere near Cyberpunk, but Villeneuve's Blade Runner series tied with Dune, so that's garnered some attention, and then Cyberpunk 2077, and how good Cyberpunk Red is doing. And then I released Neon Knights, and that's really where we're at right now. So that's my whole lore, my world building for my my game designing journey, I guess.
How you got this conversation right now, basically.
Exactly right. Yeah.
So we know it's a little bit because of cyberpunk and stuff and taking risks. What is Neon Knights then?
Good question. So that is a good question. So a lot of game designers have a very clear answer, and I do too. But Neon Knights is weird because you can make like a really solid pitch for something like Cyberpunk Red or 2077. You know, like you've got these net runners, you've got solos and things like that. With Neon Knights, basically what it is it's set in a universe a couple hundred years in the future after a post-apocalyptic event in the United States. Uh, People wandered and rambled for a couple hundred years until somebody started the first megacity in Jeriko, or on the east coast of the United States, called Jeriko City. From there,
Mm-hmm.
the world started to kind of evolve, seeing how Jericho City was being built, and multiple mega cities across the entire world began springing up. Nobody knows how, really, or why. Like, history books don't really talk about that much. So it's kind of like this mystery thing. But anyways, so the city gets started, and people now, at least in first edition, it is based solely around Jericho City. And so Neon Knights as a whole is a game where you play inside of Jericho City. You create an occupation which your character has either partaken in the past or is doing now. You then will create, or there's also a very vast perk system that is in place where you can choose,
Yes, there
like, oh,
is.
oh yeah, exactly. You can pick like this array, this giant array of perks that you can almost infinitely design for your own character. There's a lot of openness as well, even with version 1.4 that released with a lot of lore. There's a lot of openness to where GMs aren't like constricted towards certain guidelines. They can really create what they want to. And then there is also a lot of cool stuff kind of intertwined with that. So you've got like your organizations that you can be a part of. There's world stats that directly impact the role playing aspect of your game. There's items that you can have, including your typical stuff like weapons, vehicles, and residences. You can also now in version 1.4 you can have pets. You can have pets. You can, if you're really down bad, you can have some drugs that you take. There are builds that actually heighten some aspects of your abilities if you take drugs. That's a whole other conversation. And then there are, there's things that you roll wealth and things like that with, so you can determine like how much actual currency your character has. So lots of stuff, but the one word that describes Neon Knights is freedom, and that's kind of what I designed. Really, Neon Knights all around is that aspect of player freedom.
So you kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier with specifically BioWare games was the ones that I thought about. Um,
Mm-hmm.
is that BioWare? Oh my gosh, I can't
Yeah,
remember how they're
Bioware,
supposed
Mass
to.
Effect.
BioWare. Okay, yes, just double
Yeah.
checking. Um, yeah, so like obviously those are some inspirations from this, and I'm guessing that you wanted to kind of convey that similar feeling into a tabletop game.
Yeah, that's entirely true. I would say the most inspiration that I get from is definitely, in particular, really, is Fallout New Vegas. Fallout New Vegas is such a cool game because it allows you to do all sorts of things, and there are perks that not only restrict you towards things like, oh, I just want to snipe, or oh, I just want to be somebody who talks a lot. You can be somebody who wields a shotgun and is really good with only bartering, or you can take skills that increase your like pistol efficiency, but you can also be really good in like explosives and stuff like that. Like I thought that aspect was really cool, so I wanted to kind of translate that kind of feeling and that player agency that they feel when playing New Vegas, and I wanted to kind of transform that into a tabletop game. And honestly, when I was first thinking about creating a tabletop game, I was going to do one on Fallout, but then I realized that Yeah, that's already been in the works, and I think literally just this year, a giant Fallout game that's like hundreds of
Yep.
pages long was released. So
Yes, by Morpheus, which is a fantastic tabletop game company, but they're big, so I will not be bringing them on this show.
yeah, I mean, if you have them on there, that'd be great.
Oh
But
yeah, I'd be very
maybe
excited
not.
about that.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's you definitely feel it, and you have gotten a lot of. We were talking about this right before the show started. Actually, was there has been a rapid kick up in the people who are looking at this game. So, what do you think has been the trickiest part about making sure to convey that freedom to those players or those game masters who are looking to run Neon Knights?
that's a good question. So, and you're gonna hear that a lot because these questions are good. But anyways, um, a lot of I think the main thing that I've been trying to push towards, and I think is really the heart of this, is the perk system. So, well, the perk system paired with the occupation system, right? And it kind of all congeals together. But I kind of wanted, especially you can kind of see in the copy on my website, of like the places that you can buy the game. There's a lot of talk about like, do you want to become this? You can do that. Do you want to do this? You can do that. Like this like almost literally Pandora's box, like GTA style, like sandbox, like role play tied with the crunch of a system like Pathfinder or something like that that can really give you a sense of personality and specificity with your character. So I kind of highlight that the occupations and the perks really tie your characters. They're like the tape that holds your whole character together, and also yeah, and kind of push towards that. Yeah, it's crunchy, right? So it has all of these aspects that you can do, but it's also very easy to learn as well.
Yes.
And the directions are very clear and straightforward. There's not like 120 pages of how do I kick a rock. What skills do I have to use to kick a rock? And I'm like, okay, no, just use your imagination. You probably do like strength or something. So yeah, those are kind of the things I focus on.
I think that's totally fair. And one of the things I just wanted to double check before I asked you this question, about half of Neon Knights, the actual PDF that comes out, that when you buy this, half of the book is character creation and it's options. And I love that. You have a lot of options put into this game for players to really get down and make who they want. And I know a big part of Cyberpunk that I like as a theme is the augmentations. And in Neon Knights, I think you refer to them as biotech, right?
Biotech, yeah, which is kind of a as I've learned more through this wonderful COVID period that we're in, biotech is kind of like a blanket statement for like literally just like anything having to do with medicine or anything like that. So I kind of wanted to switch it up, and biotech kind of has that edgy T in it too, which kind of separates it.
Yes.
So yeah, that's the name that I went along with. Yeah.
Can you tell people a little bit about biotech and how it works in Neon Knights? Because from the ones that I've read in 1.3, I love it. I love how it's implemented so much.
Thank you. Yeah. So I'll give you the gameplay answer. So the gameplay answer literally is, so you have your MR, right? So you have your mental resist, and that is separate from your armor resist. So you have two aspects of your character that you need to watch out for, because if you have low armor resist, if you get hit with something, that's not going to feel good, and your character's going to feel it. Whereas with a mental resist, there are things like brainwave damage, which isn't really focused on too much in this version, but with the expansion, it might be heavily expanded upon. But anyways, you have mental resist, which defends against that stuff, and hacking. So if somebody decides to hack your biotech, you can actually have defense against that with your MR stat. Because it's kind of like your AR is more of like your body's hardiness or your armor's hardiness, and your MR is more of like your like kind of like resilience or like willpower. It's kind of a weird concept. But the more biotech that you have, so the more cybernetic augmentations you put on your body, the lower your MR will be. So in Neon Knights, it's not like Cyberpunk, like the Cyberpunk Red universe or Cyberpunk
Yeah.
2020 universe, where if you could reach zero and you're a cyber psycho. It's not like that. I think that takes away a lot of freedom, for lack of a better word, from your characters. So you can only go to one, but if you reach one, you better be prepared for people to actually like really get in there and mess your biotech up, because it's not good. But yeah, people can attach biotech at the beginning of the game. Theoretically, game masters can go to shops like biotech shops and have them installed. But yeah, it's a pretty cool thing, and you can have a bunch of different ones like a laser eye or night vision, or my favorite, the steroid injector, which I think is changed to like an experiment number, I think now in version 1.4, which I think is a cool little touch. And that raises all of your stats by 1 and raises your HP by 1d8 and your AR by 2, but it costs like 14 MR when your base is 15. So, like, you better be prepared to have somebody mess with those brain cells, because you're gonna have a bad time. But yeah, a lot of cool stuff with biotech for sure.
What I like about how you've implemented it too is that it still gives people that agency to experiment with different characters. And from what I've read, this seems like it's a game that, depending on your GM, may have a high fatality rate for your characters.
Yeah.
And it's tough. It is like you need to think in this one and hope that the dice are on your side. And personally, I think that that's a really fun change up compared to a lot of other games. Why did you make this like the more hardcore tabletop role playing game? And I don't mean hardcore as in like get right into the dirt, but like
Right.
a high mortality game.
Yeah. So my philosophy around it was the idea that people in Jeriko City are kind of disposable, right? So in this hyper capitalistic world, human bodies are treated like gears in a machine, right? So if a gear goes, it kind of sucks, but you can always replace it, right? And that's kind of how it is in Jeriko. A lot of people die every day. That's why mercenaries and assassins are so prevalent, and why there's a piece of lore in version 1.4 that talks about presidents or the prime chairman of the country either usually resigns because of some corrupt like thing, or they get assassinated, and those are like the two most common ways that they leave office, other than like finishing their term limit. So like death is this constant swirl in Jeriko City, and especially when your character's at level 1, it is really easy to die because you have 1d4 HP, and some of the weapons, like I literally think a crowbar is like 1d6. So like if you in the real world too, if you get hit up the side of the head with a crowbar, it can kill you, and that's definitely
Something
a reality.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's kind of the attitude that I wanted, is that people are disposable and you can die easily. So
You were talking a little bit about the city there, and that I think it's right on like the first actual bit of text is in the preface, where it talks about a little bit about Jeriko City, and it also talks about the big companies that are part of this. And I think this really establishes your themes. And for instance, like the 5 districts, like having that out right there really tells you that it's like this is a dystopian sci-fi corrupt super the game world is very much built on like really nasty capitalism,
yeah.
like to the extreme. So I think that how you've set that up is really establishes what kind of cyberpunk world it is between the high mortality rate and this. So kudos to that, because
Thank you.
I knew exactly what was going to be seen as I read that going down.
Cool.
Something else that I think a lot of people would like to know a little bit about this one is the dice system. Now,
Mm.
it's pretty straightforward. You had mentioned that you had only really ever played D&D before, which, like Neon Knights, uses all the dice.
Yeah.
Is this a similar dice system to 5th edition, or is it a little bit different?
I would say that it's pretty similar to D&D fifth edition. So you have your D20 rolls that you do for your trait checks. So if you're rolling to pick up something really heavy, you've got to roll your strength and so on and so forth. Um, but there's not like any. How do I put it? Your weapons are your spells in Neon Knights.
Yeah.
So there is a ton of dice for different weapons, and those are kind of reflected in the damage that they deal and like how frequent their rate of fire is. So I would
Okay.
say that it's actually pretty similar to how it is. So a player that plays D&D 5th edition with their rolling and their dice could easily come into Neon Knights and have a good time.
It's it's like a more free form version of that, which I
Yeah.
think is very fair to say. And while we're on the topic of this world and this game, one of my favorite things that you put in this book was, it's a very simple thing, but I really liked it, and it was, as of first edition 1.3, I have not been able to sit down and read 1.4 yet. It came out maybe 6 hours ago.
Yeah.
um, is the world creation section,
Mm.
specifically the mission world creation section for GMs who might not have a whole lot of time to play or to plan.
Mhm.
And it's the 3d6 roll to determine what's going on. You got your setting, your antagonist, and your objective, which you just kind of correlate between whatever you roll in those 3d6.
Mhm.
Where'd you get the inspiration for that? Because I love that system. I love that so much. It's so straightforward and really easy, but I feel like I could sit down and be like, all right, this is what we're doing tonight. Like, right like that.
Yeah, so you could so that's a good question as always. There is a there it kind of follows around, like you can tell in the missions and in the antagonists and things like that that it gives you just enough that you need to like really expand upon the missions and the antagonist and the like objectives and things like that. So and there's how I got that idea, I can't really say that I got it on my own. Well, kind of. It's kind of a, I didn't think Neon Knights would be as big as that it would be, and that was on the roadmap if it got big, but I didn't think it would happen. And then one of the people that reviewed my game was like, I need, this world is really cool, I need something like a mission generator or like a character generator or like something like that. And I was like, what if I like kind of streamlined that and made like these six in each of these categories? I made these six really unique feeling aspects that GMs have just enough that they can do to where they can really make it their own game. And I thought what I did was pretty cool. Like you said, it's D6, so if it's pre-game night and they're like, geez, I don't know what to play. Like, oh, okay, well, let me go get like my dice out of my Scrabble game board and let's try to see what game we can play. I thought that was really cool, and hopefully people dig it because it gives just enough. Like I've said 1,000 times before, it gives just enough crunch to where you can really do what you want.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair too. While we're here, I'd like to take a little bit of a step back from Neon Knights and talk a little bit about, well, a little bit more about you, Ethan, just so that people get to know you a little bit better.
Yeah.
One of the questions I have for you is really this is a little bit more of a broad one. Cyberpunk games, they're getting bigger recently. I mean, 2077 was announced years ago, but they've really blown up since that original announcement. What do you think might be the reason for this? Because it's not, they're not typically pleasant themes.
Yeah. That's a good question. So I And I actually took a Cyberpunk class what was it, this year? Wow, before
I
I
didn't know
graduated.
that was a
So
thing.
it
That's
was,
so
yeah.
cool.
At George Mason University, there's a AVT class, so it's I can't remember what that stands for, but it's a film class where you can study cyberpunk films and games and things like that. Uh, so I can't remember my professor's name, but if you know who I am, holler to you. Uh, but yeah, it. I think there's a lot of reasons. So it starts off in the 80s, right when the Cold War was happening, and America in particular was starting to feel a bit emasculated, if you'll excuse the terminology, from the world, because they were starting to lose a bit of their like superpower status from Russia. So you had the uprising of things like Rambo, the Terminator, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone, Predator, all of these like hyper masculine, like, oh yeah, America's the coolest thing ever. And from that, Mike Pondsmith kind of culminates both the like nihilistic almost attitude of the future of the 80s mixed in with like that really edgy kind of punkish attitudes of the people during the time into what is known as cyberpunk now. And obviously you can go all the way back to like the 20s with Pulp Fiction magazines and things like that came out. But really, in the 80s, it kind of started culminating. And as time went by, you start, seeing a lot of the crazy stuff that's happening, like with the giant explosion of the internet. You know, things like the Patriot Act that are taking that took our like internet freedoms away, and like the fallout of 2001 and all of that stuff. And then, people are starting to feel a bit more estranged like that, especially paired with the surveillance state. And then you get into like this beautiful orchestra of aesthetics with things like vaporwave and synthwave and games like what was it, Hotline Miami, and things like that really start like forming this weird amalgamation of like synthwave, vaporwave stuff with like the typical cyberpunk kind of aesthetic. And it reached its peak, I think, really with the hype that led up to Cyberpunk 2077. And I think the reason why it's so popular and why I think it's going to just keep rising is because we live in a society right now where, it feels like we're being further and further away from the physical world. Our digital lives are being kind of replaced, or at the very least melded with our physical ones. COVID has made us more solitary. And, giant monopolies like Amazon and Google and things like that are on the rise. So a cyberpunk future, even as dark as Neon Nights or anything else, isn't too far away. Maybe without like the cybernetic mercenaries, but, the hyper-capitalistic aspects are not a stone throw away, but definitely like a pitcher's pitch away for sure.
That was a far more in-depth answer than I expected, and thank you. I actually learned a lot there. That's super cool.
Thank you.
Wow. Okay.
I love this stuff, and like I said, thanks.
Great.
Shout out to the professor.
So, speaking of your professor in school, you're recently out of school. So, once again, congratulations for that.
Thank you.
And during this last little bit since you've graduated, you've released Neon Nights. One of your other titles is, I believe it was called Beyond Dreams.
Yeah, yep.
That was a game collection, right?
Yep, it was.
So you're putting out like a fair bit of content pretty quickly. Can you tell me about your writing process then?
That's a good question too. So let's see. I would say my writing process for game design is so much different from literature writing. Literature, like short stories, poems, things like that, there's a much different vibe. But with game design, I don't know what it is, but I just jump into it. I get this like feeling in my body, like this little spark that's just like, hey, let's make this. And I'm like, woo, I like the sound of that. And I go on my computer, I write a draft down of something that sounds cool. I've got a whole folder full of potential projects that I'm going to work on, and that will probably release next year. I don't know. But I get down and I write the draft and I'm like, that sounds really cool. And then it kind of morphs one thing to another, and it's just things that I really like. Like, ooh, there's this really cool piece of media that I really like. I'm gonna morph that into my own thing. Oh, here's something really cool that I like was thinking about as I was taking a walk, and I'll like kind of walk in like this mall of ideas and pick them off and put them in my shopping cart. And then when the time comes, I'll check out, and if people if my credit card is declined, that sucks. We'll move on to something else. But if my bank account is full and I get to purchase it, then boom, we'll move on to the next shopping run next week. So yeah, it's been a blast, and especially with this boom of popularity, small time, of course, that Neon Knights has gotten. It's been a boost in energy, and I've never been more thrilled to make a project.
I'm glad that you're loving the writing process for Neon Knights so much. And one of the things I think that a lot of people who have Neon Knights or who followed you will know is that you are periodically updating the versions for Neon Knights. So like I said earlier, we're at 1.4 now as of release for this. But you're also working on an expansion, Guns and Bullets, Arms and Armor. What goes into an expansion versus going into an update?
Good question. So an expansion is most like how I view an expansion in a video game. It's like there are these narrative elements that are going to be in Guns and Bullets. I can't describe what, but they're going to be narrative elements tied with it. There are going to be just more content, really, than an update will give. And there'll also be like some cool characters that you can meet and put into your games too. So those three aspects really kind of make the expansion its own thing. It's almost like its own. I was on a podcast the other day, and they explained it as a toy box, and I love that idea. It's like this toy box of ideas and items and things like that you can pull out and make your own. And I think it's going to be really cool. There are a lot of wacky characters. There are a lot of cool, unique items, armor pieces, biotech, all sorts of cool stuff that's going to be in Guns and Bullets Arms and Armor catalog. I can't wait to release it.
I'm very excited for that too, especially just to look at the perks and just see how many new ones are there.
Oh yeah, there's going to be there are going to be some new perks, that's for sure.
So while you've been working on Guns and Bullets as well as the updates for Neon Knights, you also mentioned working on a new IP. And if you don't want to talk about that too much, that's totally fair. Biopunk Tainted Vein. Can you share anything about this game to us yet? Or do you want to hold off on that?
So I'll talk about what I've explained through social media. So
okay.
Biopunk Tainted Vein is a game, and it has a really cool catch line, but it's kind of out there. It's a game that's set in a biopunk world where people change organs and limbs like they do clothes. Clothes get dirty, you change your limbs. Organs get ruptured or damaged, change your organ. Perfectly fine. Let's see, what else can I say? There are certain peoples that you can choose that have certain parts like not attached to them, but that are associated with them. So you have one people that are associated with like courage and like honor, and they're like the people of heart. Then you have people who are, really studious and focus on the arts and spoken ways that are more of the mind. And then you have people who are like on this weird third path that are trying to improve themselves, not through normal means, but through what they call the Mordic arts, which is this almost magical energy, which isn't actually magical. It's actually nanotechnology that they discovered centuries ago that has like formed these people. So I kind of wanted it to be around the aspect of mind, body, and spirit that this world is going to be around. So yeah, I think that's all I can say about this, but it's going to be a completely different system than Neon Knights and any of my other things. Different world, obviously. And yeah, it's going to have that same aspect of freedom, but it's also going to be a very aesthetically pleasing, I guess, game, as well as very wacky and very not wacky, I would say, but very different from your normal game, and where you can do all these stuff with organs and have 3 arms, or have an eye on your back, or something like that. Like you can do all this crazy stuff, and I'm excited to release it when it comes out.
I look forward to hearing more about that.
Yeah.
So we're getting close to wrapping up the show here, but I got a couple more questions for you.
Yeah.
A big thing we've mentioned it a little bit, COVID. How's this affected Neon Knights? Because everybody else who's come on this show, for the most part, they've had some ups, some downs. Some people have had the time. You were in school during COVID, which I've have friends who are in university right now and say it's an absolute nightmare.
Oh, it is, or it was.
How has COVID-19 affected you and the productions of this game?
Yeah, so I'll try to keep it brief, but so I would say at the beginning of COVID, it actually didn't hurt it at all. I was actually pretty pumped to make it and to give our friends something to do. I had a little bump where I just graduated and I was just figuring out like what job am I gonna get? Like what am I gonna do? And then once I really released Neon Knights, I haven't really had any issues with COVID, and with the design, it hasn't really affected that either. There are a lot of other things that COVID has affected, but game design really isn't one of them, and I hope it doesn't in the future. Hopefully, we're gonna keep this game chugging along.
I'm glad to hear it. I think a lot of people appreciate this game and have a lot of fun with it too.
I
So
hope.
this is definitely one to, especially for the price. It's such a reasonable price for what you get.
Yeah, it
Base,
used to be
yeah.
$4.99, and now it's $9.99, and even still, I say that it's actually pretty good.
It's very good price. Final question that I love to ask everybody who comes on this show, except for the last episode, because we got a lot of talk about advice throughout the entire podcast episode. What advice can you give to a person wanting to create their own game, but they don't know where to start?
Oh my god, I cannot believe I'm asking or being asked this question. Usually I'm the one who's asking this. Oh my gosh, that's so weird. Number one piece of advice, put it out there. Doesn't matter how bad it is, put it out there. I created Neon Knights in Canva, a piece of software that isn't the most like graphic design friendly, but I created it. I sent it out there. Neon Knights version 1.0 was a heaping pile of garbage, but people liked it though. People liked it, and I was shocked to see that. So even though my own personal biases and things like that to myself, like, oh, I could have done this better, push that aside. Release it. If you get backlash for it, start over. Do it again. But if you've really got a passion for this, put it out there, because everybody starts somewhere, and you never know where it will lead you. And yeah, that's kind of my answer there. That's crazy. Yeah, I can't believe I'm asked this question, but great question. As always, for every question you've asked, great question.
Well, thank you so much. I believe the Just Release It, we had another guest by the name of Brian LeBurn, and he called them releasing your fantasy heartbreak, which was your game that you know is not going to be great, but you'll get it out there and then you can move on to something you'll actually really get invested in.
Yep, yeah.
So,
Yeah. Good piece of advice.
Ethan, thank you so much for coming on. Where can people find more about you and Neon Knights and your upcoming work?
Oh, that's a good question. As always, so you can find my Twitter at at Ethan H Reynolds. You can also find me on Patreon at the same name. Both of those accounts really publish a lot of my stuff that I'm doing with my games. You can find my Patreon is the most, I would say, like in depth with my design process, but on Twitter you can see announcements and stuff like that. You can also go to my website, thelorisatlas.com, which sometimes gets updated. Don't think that that's like a very frequent blog, but I have some writing on there, and I do some updates there. So if I get some extra traffic, maybe I might continue that. But no, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate always going on these podcasts, and I love talking about my games too. So it's awesome.
Well, it was great to have you on, and thank you for coming on. It was a lot of fun. I learned a lot about this game. I learned some really
Yeah.
cool stuff about the history of Cyberpunk that I didn't expect. And
Yeah.
that was cool because I've been falling in love with trying to learn how to play synthesizers. So maybe there's something to add to myself there.
Oh yeah.
And thank you, audience, for listening. All those socials that Ethan talked about, they're going to be down in the description below, as always. Ethan, thank you so much. Audience, thank you for listening. Ethan and Neon Knights, they're scheduled for launch. They're already launched. Go get it. Go check out this game. Take care and have a good night. Bye. So for those of you who are wondering, the little chirps are my lovely partner's bird, Joey. He was in the room and he wanted to get in on the conversation a little bit. But thank you so much to Ethan for coming onto the show this week. I learned far more than I expected to, and I was oddly shy with how friendly and positive Ethan was. Go check out Neon Knights because it's a really good price, and there's some great stuff in there, and I think you'll really like it. And really, thank you, listeners. At this point, we've passed over 500 downloads. It's incredible. That's 500 in literally our first 21 weeks. So if it keeps up, we might even break 1,000 within our first year, and that would be something really special. If you like the show and you want to keep it growing, make sure to share and review the podcast. This is the best way for us to grow. Plus, it gives a bit more of a push in that podcast algorithm. Next week, we will be having our first music guest on since the very first episode. David is a dear and cherished friend of mine, and I'm very excited for you all to hear the conversation we had. Until next time, though, take care of yourself. Have a good night. Bye.